Hello. In this lesson, we're going to be learning about plot. We're going to be defining plot and talking about the different parts or elements of plot. Okay, so what is plot? Well, we're studying narratives. Okay, so narratives basically are stories, and each story has a sequence of events, referred to as plot. Okay, so what is plot? It is the structure or organization of events which make up a fictional story, or which make up a narrative. Okay. We can break plot down into 5 different parts or elements that we're going to be discussing in a moment. Okay, so if you think about your favorite movie, that movie or your favorite book, that movie or book has a plot. It has a particular sequence of events or things that take place within that story or that narrative. Okay, so there are 5 parts or elements of plot. What are they? Well, first of all, we have the exposition. Now, in the exposition, the characters are introduced. Okay, we learn who the protagonist is. We learn who the antagonist is, the good guy, the bad guy, and we learn about some minor characters. We also learn about the setting, the time, and the location that the narrative is taking place in. In addition to that, we might be introduced to the main conflict of the story. Okay, so for instance, at the beginning of Star Wars, Episode 4, we're introduced to Princess Leia, Luke Skywalker, and Darth Vader. So we know the protagonists, we know the antagonists, we know that Princess Leia has been captured by Darth Vader and that Luke needs to save her. So we're introduced to the main conflict as well. And we know that it takes place in a galaxy far, far away, or a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. So we're also introduced to the setting. Okay, so that would be the exposition. Now, what's the next element of plot, or the part of our narrative? We have the rising action. Now, rising action refers to the part of a narrative or part of a story where the conflict is beginning to build. Okay, we haven't reached the most exciting part yet, but we're building up conflict, we're building up suspense, we're building up anxiety. Okay, so we begin to get more and more interested in the story and more involved as readers or watchers. Okay. Now, the climax refers to the most exciting part of the story where the conflict comes to a head. It's the part of the story where the good guy and the bad guy, the protagonist and the antagonist, would meet up, and essentially, if it's a man versus man conflict, they would probably fight. Okay, it's when Rocky fights Apollo Creed. That's the climax of the story. That's when the two, the protagonist and the antagonist, come together and have a boxing match. It's when Luke Skywalker and Darth Vader have a lightsaber battle. That is the climax, the most exciting part of the story, when the conflict sort of comes to a head. Okay. After the climax, we have the falling action. Okay, this is when the conflict is resolved. Okay, and the loose ends in the story get tied up. Falling action generally does not last very long in either a book or in either a novel or a movie. The falling action is sort of probably the shortest section. Okay, it doesn't take very long for those conflicts to become resolved once we reach the falling action, or those loose ends to be tied up. Okay, and then we have the resolution, sometimes called denouement. And this is the end of the story, when the story comes to a reasonable conclusion. And now, some stories end on a cliffhanger. Some movies, for example, maybe the producer wants to make a sequel, so they don't tie all the loose ends up, and the movie probably doesn't come to a completely reasonable or satisfactory conclusion because the producers want to make a sequel, Okay, they want to keep you on the edge of your seat. But for the most part, our narratives are going to have a resolution where all of the problems have been resolved and the story comes to an end. Okay, now as you can see, our narrative structure looks sort of like a mountain. At the top of the mountain, we have the most exciting part of the story, the climax. Okay, so after that, we're falling. That's our falling action until we reach the conclusion at the other end of the mountain. All right. So as we go forward and read more narratives and write our own narratives, I want you to think in terms of this plot structure here, this narrative structure, this plot mountain, if you will. Okay. All right, that's it for this lesson. Thank you very much for listening.